Today, we're diving into the story of one teacher who looked at the Canadian school system, saw a huge gap between its promises of equality and the reality for students, and decided they had to do something about it. We're going to follow their journey from just seeing the problem to actively fighting it.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're exploring today. What does fighting for equity in our schools actually look like? Once you get past all the mission statements and the official policies. Well, we're about to see.
So here's how we'll break it down. We'll start with their critical journey, then talk about moving beyond what's just performative, unpack the invisible rules of the system, see what it means to teach against the grain, and finally, look at why the work is never really done. All right, so our story starts with a Black Canadian educator who's also a doctoral student, and from that unique vantage point, they see this massive divide between what schools say they're doing for equity and what's actually happening on the ground, in the classrooms.
And what they realize is this huge central contradiction. The school system can be a place where we fight against inequality, for sure, but it can also be the very machine that keeps those same inequalities running, generation after generation.
So, while they're deep in their doctoral studies, the author has this big aha moment. They start to see that all the good intentions in the world, all the official policies, they just weren't leading to real change. Something else was getting in the way. And that something is the huge difference between performative equity and substantive change. You see, performative equity, well, it looks good. It's the diversity posters, the one-off assemblies, the statements that sound great but don't have teeth. Substantive change, though, that's the messy, difficult work of actually shifting power, moving resources, and completely rethinking how the system is built. And look, this wasn't just some abstract idea. The author saw it play out in the real world, in the Peel District School Board. They had all these equity mandates written down on the books, but at the same time, official reports were finding that anti-Black racism was still a deep systemic problem. The performance was there, but the change wasn't.
And get this, in a school with 120 teachers, the author was one of only 5 who were Black. It's just a stunning example of what we call tokenism. It's when you have the appearance of diversity on the surface, but the institution's culture, its power structures, they haven't changed at all.
So, with this new lens, the author starts to assemble a toolkit, a set of critical ideas to help them not just see, but really challenge the invisible rules that keep the whole system stuck in place.
First up is this idea of the curriculum as a political text. Now that sounds academic, but what it really means is that the choices we make about what we teach our kids are never neutral. Every history lesson, every book we assign, it's all part of a larger argument. And way too often it reinforces the dominant stories while leaving others out. Next in the toolkit is the concept of white fragility. This is a term that helps us understand those really defensive reactions, things like anger or guilt or just outright denial that can come up when folks are confronted with the reality of racial inequality. It's what often shuts down the conversation before it can even begin.
And the author saw this firsthand. During a professional development day, one that was supposed to be about anti-Black racism, they actually heard colleagues say this exact phrase, "I don't see race." It's just a textbook example of that denial, a way to avoid the discomfort of really grappling with racism.
And finally, a really crucial distinction they learned to make was between equity and Indigenous sovereignty. See, equity is often about trying to make the current system fairer for everybody in it. But Indigenous sovereignty is something else entirely. It's about recognizing the rights of Indigenous nations to govern themselves, their relationship to the land, and their existence as nations that came long before the colonial state. It's not about fixing the system, it's about a different system altogether.
Okay, so that's all the theory. But how do you take these big ideas and actually make them work in a classroom? Well, this is where it gets really powerful.
So, let's take a grade 12 business class. Instead of just adding a single token lesson about Indigenous business, the author redesigned the whole thing from the ground up. They built the entire unit around Indigenous trade histories. They partnered with local Indigenous knowledge keepers. And, this is so important, they fought for the funding to actually pay those partners for their time and expertise. Now that's substantive change.
And they applied that same deep thinking to supporting trans and gender-diverse students. The approach shifted from what's called harm reduction, which is really just a reactive focus on basic safety, to affirmation and trans joy. That means proactively creating a celebratory environment, normalizing inclusive language, and making sure non-binary stories and experiences are an essential part of the curriculum.
And this transformation was everywhere. It was in rewriting special education plans to focus on students' strengths. It was fighting to get laptops for kids who couldn't afford them.
It was even creating scripts to help other teachers respond better to discrimination. The biggest leap, though, was going from just making changes in their own classroom to fighting for policy changes that would impact the entire school board.
Which brings us to our final thought, because a journey like this doesn't really have a neat, tidy ending. It's an ongoing process, an ongoing commitment.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that real, meaningful change in our schools isn't just one thing. It takes coordinated, simultaneous shifts in what we teach, in the policies that govern our schools, and in how we distribute our resources. It's all about moving past the performance of equity and towards genuine accountability.
And that leaves us with some pretty big questions to chew on, like this one. How do we actually hold school boards accountable for real, measurable results, not just for saying the right things?
And maybe most importantly, how do we train our teachers better so that when racist or transphobic incidents happen in a classroom, they don't just freeze up, but they have the tools to turn those awful moments into powerful opportunities for learning? That's the challenge, and that's the work that continues.